Sometimes in life, things happen that make us naturally anxious. And as much as we'd like to avoid that, sometimes we just can't. It's part of being human. It's part of being alive. And that could be difficult and it can be confusing. But those are the moments that it's important to remember that not all anxiety is disordered anxiety. So let's talk about that this week on episode 330 of The Anxious Truth. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Anxious Truth. This is episode 330 of the podcast. We're recording in November of 2025, in case you're listening in the future. This is legitimately a hastily produced, no video on YouTube, no production values, gravelly voice, Drew is still sick podcast episode. But I really didn't want to skip the week. I had another topic queued up that we'll get to another time, but I wasn't really loving it. And a member of my Instagram audience suggested that I bring this topic this week, and I thought it was a great idea, so here we are. Today we're going to talk about anxiety that arises when bad things really do happen, like actual bad things or difficult things or challenging things in life. It's a really good topic. It was a great question that this person asked because in my experience, not just as a podcaster or an author, as a social media guy, but even in my therapy practice, this is a very challenging and confusing situation for any anxious person that doesn't exactly know what to do with that anxiety or those difficult feelings. So I really want to get into that. We'll spend maybe 15 minutes on it today. Before we do, just a very quick reminder with my sick, gravelly voice. Again, I'm really sorry. That's what I got this week. But The Anxious Truth is more than just this podcast episode or this YouTube video, which isn't even really a video on YouTube this week. If you go to my website at theanxioustruth.com, you're going to find a whole bunch of other stuff, the previous 329 podcast episodes and links to low-cost workshops and all the free social media stuff and the books that I've written. So if you like what you find here when you listen to this podcast, and if you're a new listener, by the way, welcome. Sorry for the crappy episode this week. But if you find what we're doing here on The Anxious Truth helpful in this episode, you might find the other things helpful too. So go check it all out. That's at theanxioustruth.com. So this week, we're going to talk about what happens when bad things really do happen in life. And that makes you anxious. That triggers anxiety. If you are dealing with chronic or disordered forms of anxiety, especially if you've been struggling with it for any length of time, you're probably in a situation where anytime you feel anything uncomfortable, it becomes kind of a big deal. I get it. I used to be there too. All anxious people in the audience surrounding this podcast and my books and everything else, everybody in my therapy practice completely understands that. I don't want to be triggered into an anxious state, but sometimes life happens. Bad things happen. We lose loved ones. We lose long-term relationships. We lose our jobs. We get into conflict. We have money problems. We have health problems. We have family issues. We have relationship issues. Like anything can happen in life. Life is often very difficult. It can be challenging. It can be triggering. And in those moments, an anxious person is going to find themselves experiencing big feelings, big emotions, some of which might be uncertainty or fear or anxiety or upset, or just big, powerful emotions that then morph into anxiety because that's a really common occurrence in our community. And they don't know what to do with that. So the principle that I always try to rely on here is that not all anxiety is disordered anxiety, right? If something big happens in your life, something that really challenges you, something that triggers memories or bad memories, big emotions, big feelings, these are difficult things. You are faced with uncertainty or doubt or the unknown, actual uncertainty, doubt, or the unknown, maybe about important relationships or the people in your life or your health, then you are naturally going to experience what many people would label as fear or anxiety or some form of discomfort. Like that would be normal for any human being. We would understand that. Like your neighbors who maybe do not have anxiety disorders would look at the situation that you're in or your friends or your loved ones, and they would not be in any way surprised that you are feeling big things when big life things happen. The problem is, in the context of an anxiety disorder, this is what we're always talking about here on The Anxious Truth, the state of being anxious itself becomes the problem, right? So we talk about this all the time. An anxiety disorder is essentially defined as, being anxious about being anxious, being afraid of being afraid. Like whatever the original trigger was, or if there was a root cause, we've talked about this before in this podcast, doesn't matter anymore because the state of being anxious itself becomes the problem, right? So if you're listening to this or attempting to watch on YouTube, then you probably understand that. No, I can't handle that. I can't handle when I have these big feelings. I cannot handle the physical sensations that come with that. I cannot handle the big emotions that come with that. I cannot handle the scary thoughts that go through my head. I can't handle the state itself. That's the difference between disordered anxiety and what we would call maybe regular or externally generated anxiety. In an anxiety disorder, the anxiety is internally generated. You are anxious on Tuesday because you were anxious on Monday and don't want to repeat that, right? In simplistic terms. So anything that creates an uncomfortable internal experience for a person with an anxiety disorder, anything that might trigger internal discomfort is going to become a problem for a person with an anxiety disorder. In my own personal experience, that's exactly how it worked. I couldn't handle being angry. I couldn't handle being disappointed. I couldn't handle being sad. Heck, I couldn't even handle being happy or excited. Like all those things would just instantly morph into a fear response or an anxious response. So, that's really normal. And what that means is that when anything happens in an anxious person's life, if you are struggling with an anxiety disorder, anything challenging that happens that creates those big, difficult internal experiences that all human beings would understand, because we all experience them sometimes. For you, you will declare that those feelings themselves are a huge problem, but they're not, and they're not avoidable. So in a way, it's a bit of an exposure for you, because while this is not the usual trigger for you, whatever that happens to be, whatever triggers maybe your OCD theme, or whatever triggers your rumination habits, or whatever triggers panic attacks for you, this is not necessarily that. You may know those triggers. This is just something in my life has happened that is beyond my control, that is making me feel things, and I am terrified of the fact that I am feeling the things. Now, this speaks a little bit to that sort of misconception that people around you may have, that you become very self-centered and very selfish. Some people call people with an anxiety disorder, they'll immediately say they have, borderline personality disorder, or they're narcissists. But that's simply not true. Why do they say that though? Because no matter what's going on around the anxious person, the person with an anxiety disorder, the anxiety disorder will demand that it become the center of attention. So if something difficult has just happened in your family and everybody's feeling that, they understand why they're feeling it, while you are only concerned that you're feeling it. See the difference? Like if there's a big loss in your family, for instance, and the rest of your family is feeling that, they're having big emotions, they're going through memories, this is a difficult time for them. They understand why they feel that way, whereas you may be stuck only on that you feel that way. And since you cannot escape it because you're human, it becomes even more of a disaster. I can't calm down. I can't cope. I'm trying to float and accept, and it won't go away. That's right. I've had people experience major losses in their life, the loss of a loved one, wanting to know how they're supposed to float and accept through the loss of this loved one. And while all you can do is float and accept through it at a certain level, they think that they should be able to use like recovery concepts and techniques to somehow get away from the real, normal, natural, sort of organic, expected feelings that are going to come up when life throws curveballs at you. And they can't. So that makes it even more confusing. So I think if you're in a situation where something bad has happened in your life, or something very challenging has happened in your life, or things happen in your life and you're afraid that they might, and that triggers an anxious or uncomfortable state, that is a great time for you to stop and really think, like, wait a minute, what is going on here? Like, I am confronted with this big, scary life challenge that was just thrown at me that I didn't ask for. And I am responding to that with normal human response, normal emotions. The problem here is that I call those normal responses and emotions intolerable, incapacitative, unhandleable, and unacceptable. And that's an untenable position to be in. So while everybody would hope that when I do a podcast episode on this topic, they're going to hear me give tips on like how to feel less anxious when something big happens in your life, there's no such thing, because you already go into it in a sensitized state where the state of being anxious itself is declared an emergency. and that must require some sort of action or response or fixing or figuring out or evasive action, you're already in it that way. So there's almost no tips here or tricks or techniques or hacks that you're going to use that say, well, when something that should make you anxious makes you anxious, here's a technique that makes that stop. That would not be a thing. There is no such thing. I mean, we could get sort of not controversial, but we could be a little bit philosophical here. And sometimes people complain because we've gotten into the habit of medicating humanity. But there are times when people legitimately and with excellent intent and with good, outcomes will turn to pharmaceutical interventions to get them through very difficult times. One of the reasons why we write antidepressant prescriptions like crazy in the United States is they become really, handy. Like, oh, you just went through a big divorce after 20 years of marriage. Here's an antidepressant. You just lost your parent. Here's an antidepressant. You lost your job and you have financial problems. Here's an antidepressant. So you can go down that road. I'm not saying that to pick on it or any bad judgment about it. That is a perfectly acceptable intervention if you want to go down that road. But that's kind of the only one that I'm aware of that's going to immediately somehow get you away from this very difficult experience that is expected, normal. Like, there's nothing unusual about being anxious. Say if you lose the loved one, or if you're having money problems, or you lose, or you have, a very long-term intimate relationship ends suddenly, you're supposed to have those feelings. That's would be expected. So we don't have, other than a pharmaceutical intervention, any sort of tips I'm going to give you to instantly make that stop. Oh, I have to do acceptance now. Or what kind of exposure is there for going to a funeral? Well, none. The funeral itself is the exposure. And always remember, by the way, that the internal experience is always the thing anyway. It has nothing to do with a funeral or driving on the highway or staying alone or whatever it is. So, I don't have, where are we, like 12, 13 minutes into this episode? I don't have a lot to tell you on this. All I can really offer is I can validate that if you are feeling really upset, maybe something is triggering really powerful memories. Maybe you have a traumatic background and that's being triggered. Like, it is normal to feel that way. You really are feeling that way. If you are really feeling big sadness or having a flood of unhappy memories or really challenging memories, and you're feeling sadness, or you're feeling anger, or you're feeling betrayal, or you're feeling despair, or you're just feeling really afraid, that's a normal experience. It's a very unpleasant experience, but it's a real experience. You really do have those emotions, and they are attributable to things we could see right in front of us, but it doesn't make it any easier, right? So I can normalize that. You are, in fact, having a normal human response to a really challenging circumstance, and I can validate that. This is not just in your head. Now, that's another thing that I think might get confusing, because often we're kind of doing the whole like, oh, I have to learn that it's mind over matter with anxiety recovery. It's just in my head. There's really no danger. I'm only imagining it. No, not really. We don't go down that road because you truly are afraid. You truly do believe you're in danger. You truly do believe that there's a risk involved. So right now you truly are feeling all the big things that have been triggered and created by this difficult, event or circumstance in your life. So we can normalize it as a normal part of being alive, and we can validate that because these are emotions and feelings that you're supposed to have. They're difficult, but I'm not even going to say that you're supposed to have them. You're actually entitled to them. They are part of your humanity. The problem is you have created a blanket statement in your life that's kind of governing your life and driving your decisions that says, I should never allow uncomfortable, difficult, hard to handle, overwhelming feeling internal things. I can't ever allow those. And then when they do come up organically, naturally, in a situation where everybody would understand why, this becomes a problem. So to kind of put a bow on it a little bit, what about anxiety when bad things really do happen? That's normal anxiety. That's not disordered anxiety. The disordered part is the part where you put all the focus on that you feel that way. The fact that you feel that the things you feel becomes the major focus, as opposed to why you feel that way. So you got to keep that in mind. As always, you got to be really careful, because you can quickly start to berate yourself or pick on yourself or judge yourself very harshly, because maybe, again, you lost a loved one, or maybe you lost a long-term relationship or something along those lines. And now you're just like an anxious mess, And now you're berating yourself. So I shouldn't feel this way. No, you should feel that way. Like, give yourself a break. You're going to have big reactions to big events in your life. Trying to like roboticize yourself so that you never feel uncomfortable things, that's not okay. That's an impossible ask of yourself, and it's not very kind. So start with recognizing that you are a human being like everybody else, and you have arrived in this difficult circumstance that all human beings encounter from time to time. Then the next step is you got to recognize what's happening here. Oh, wait a minute. I'm making how I feel the most important thing in the room again. And I have to allow myself to feel these things, which is a huge ask. If an anxious person could just let go and let themselves feel all the hard things, they would quickly recover and wouldn't be an anxious person anymore. So this is going to be challenging. Remember though, that all experiences are transient, every last one. There's a reason why we have ridiculous cliches like time heals all wounds and things of that nature. I don't know how intensely you're feeling today because of what may have happened in your life recently, or maybe in the past that's been sort of re-triggered or dredged back up on you. The intensity of what you're feeling right now is not a forever experience. It will ebb and flow. So just like when your OCD flares up, or your GAD has you by the throat, or you're having rolling panic attacks, or whatever, your health anxiety has flared up, remember that the intensity of that experience always changes too. This intensity is also going to wax and wane. We just have to be patient, because unfortunately, while a panic attack left to its own devices might technically be over in 10 or 15 minutes and then some aftershocks, if you lose somebody important to you, as an example, that pain kind of lasts a while. Like, you can't just hope that you're going to feel better in 15 minutes. What you can do is recognize that you're fighting the state itself. Let go, be kind to yourself, and allow yourself to have a human response to a difficult thing in life. Then you may have a chance of not adding a problem on top of a problem. But again, that's a big ask. I understand it's a big ask. If you're listening to this podcast or watching my YouTube channel or following along on social media or reading my books or whatever it happens to be, you are likely struggling to learn how to allow these experiences so you can learn through that you don't have to fear them. And having to do that in the midst of a life crisis or a big life event of some kind is even harder than it would be otherwise. So the best you can do sometimes is just be kind, recognize that you're kind of fighting the wrong battle right now. You're trying to control how you feel at a time like that would be impossible. You have to be kind to yourself and let yourself be human and have these emotions and have these reactions. That's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. And you're going to have to do the best you can to drop that fight moment by moment, moment by moment, moment by moment, and see if you can engage more with the why. In this situation, the why matters. If I have to go to a funeral, or I have to go and sign my, divorce decree, or go to court, in a custody hearing, these are such difficult things. But this is a thing in my life that is important to me. It reflects things that are important to me. It speaks to my values. I need to get this resolved. So I can either make the pounding in my chest the most important thing, or I could make my grandma's funeral at least as important and roll those dice, right? So not a lot of wisdom here, other than just hopefully giving you the ability to recognize what happens when life triggers your anxiety, because it's supposed to. Again, not a lot of tips, tricks, or hacks here that are going to make you feel instantly better. Just know that you're not alone in that. You're just a human like everybody else, and you're allowed to be. So in the end, if you can navigate through this and catch that fight against your own feelings as often as you can and correct as often as you can, you may come out the other side with a little better understanding of what it actually looks like when you do anxiety exposures and things of that nature. And maybe at the same time, you'll gain a little bit of a little extra kindness or compassion for yourself if you can navigate through this very human time in your life. So I wish I could give you more on that. I'm actually kind of running out of gas and losing my voice. Again, sorry for the really crappy podcast this week, but I'm going to wrap it up because I'm going to lose my voice probably in the next couple of minutes. I can feel it going. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate it. If you did make it this far into the podcast, I would ask, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, to maybe leave a 5-star rating if you like The Anxious Truth. And if you really like it, maybe take a second and write a few sentences as to why, because that helps other people find the podcast. And if you're on YouTube, even though there's nothing to look at but some sort of still image today, maybe like the video or subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you know when I upload new stuff. And however way you support the work that I'm doing, even if it's just listening to this podcast episode and never coming back again, thank you. I appreciate that. And I do hope that I was helpful in some way today. And I'll end with a little reminder, as I always do. When life is really challenging, because it's going to be, and you're feeling ways that you think you cannot handle, remember that you have always handled how you felt. Always. You have never failed. You just don't like what it feels like when you handle it, but you can work on that. Let yourself be human, do the best you can minute by minute, connect back to the things that represent your values in a time of crisis. That may be a good guidepost, and hang in there. It's a cliche and it's meaningless, but I'm going to say it anyway. Hang in there. Thanks for coming this week. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another topic. Still not sure what that's going to be. And on Friday, of course, every Friday is Disordered. That's the podcast I do with Josh Fletcher. So go check that one out at disordered.fm. The Anxious Truth is every other week. Disordered is every week. Go check that out. Go visit all the resources on my website at theanxioustruth.com. Thanks for hanging out. See you in the next one.